somehow in the sport realm of Canada, we rushed into a policy recommendation that we really hadn't tested with the vulnerable populations, including women and girls. This is, to me, the importance of it is that it's the first time in Canadian history of sport that the views of female athletes actually have been sought by Canadian sport leadership.
Well, hi, I'm Aaron Wudrick. I'm the director of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute's Domestic Policy Program, and I'm very excited today to be chatting with Dr. Linda Blade, the president of Athletics Alberta and a former Canadian track and field champion. Dr. Blade has spent 25 years as a sport performance professional in over 15 sports. She has a PhD in kinesiology and has traveled the globe conducting education courses on behalf of World Athletics. She is also the author of a recent commentary at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute entitled Breaking the Silence, Female Athletes Speak About Safe and Fair Sport in Canada, which responded to a report obtained by the MLI through an access to information request that summarizes the views of elite female athletes towards policies that allow individuals to compete in either male or female sports categories based on their gender identity as opposed to their biological sex. Linda, I want to thank you so much for joining me today to chat.
Thanks for having me, Aaron.
So I guess let's start with the obvious question, Linda. Why did you decide to write this piece?
Well, I felt that there was a terrible negligence on the part of most media to expose what's been happening in women's sports. There has been a sort of one-sided policy focusing on the needs of people who identify as transgender and non-binary, and they have had no coverage of what has been happening and what that means in women's sports and to women in sport. So what you have really is two conflicting rights. You have the rights of somebody to express on the basis of gender identity, but you also have the sex-based rights of women and girls. And, you know, Macdonald-Laurier Institute is really the only one that comes to the table in honesty and integrity to deliver that message that we can see both sides of this story, and we need both sides of the story in order to come to some sort of a resolution on what to do in women's sports. And so I really appreciate what the Institute has done.
Okay, well, we certainly appreciate your kind words, and we'll get back to that in a minute. But I wanted to ask you a bit about the report itself. As I mentioned, this was a report that was originally commissioned by Sport Canada. It was killed off by the minister, but it did survive in the bowels of government, and we managed to get it through access information. So maybe you can sort of touch on what did this report, what did it do, and what are sort of the key things that you got out of that report?
So what the report did was reinforce my instinct as a leader in sport in Canada, as president of a provincial sports association, that there was a policy recommendation being brought down from on high from the sport bureaucracy that was actually going to destroy women's sports. And so part of the problem is whenever somebody brings in a new policy that's radically different than anything we've ever seen in history, that is that males can self-identify into women's sports. When you bring in a policy that says that, and they don't have to have surgery or hormonal intervention, anything, they can just identify one day as a woman, next day as a man. When we have that, that's bound to create chaos in sports. So what I felt was that the women and the female voices had not been consulted. And sure enough, when Sport Canada did this survey, it turns out that there's a pretty impressive percentage of female persons and athletes in Canada who really absolutely disagree and should be heard on this issue. For example, in the actual survey, once it came out, thanks to you guys getting the ATIP through MLI, it's like female athletes feel that to the tune of 91.7% agree that female athletes should have the human right to compete in a dedicated female sports category that is affected by sex. And 80-something, about 84% disagree that the priority should be given to your gender identity on basis of how you compete. So you know what? The frustrating thing, Aaron, is that you should actually have these kinds of consultations and surveys before you ever change a policy. But in Canada, somehow in the sport realm of Canada, we rushed into a policy recommendation that we really hadn't tested with the vulnerable populations, including women and girls. And so it has been somewhat of a, human rights issue for us, sex-based rights in the charter. And so this is, to me, the importance of it is that it's the first time in Canadian history of sport that the views of female athletes actually have been sought by Canadian sport leadership.
Now, you talk about the policies in place in sport. I think a lot of Canadians probably have no idea what they are. They're just completely in the dark about them. They may not be very familiar about them. So, I guess I ask you, as someone who's a leader in the field, what do you want people to understand about gender identity policy in Canada today?
Well, what it says, most of the things that the Canadian Center for Ethics in Sport is promoting is a full, complete self ID with no questions asked. So anybody can identify as anything they'd like, and the sports officials are supposed to not only accept it and affirm, but they're also supposed to not question, not verify. And in fact, it seems to be the way the environment is right now, sociologically in Canada, sociocultural, the awareness of this is still sort of emerging, and so everybody feels fear. So nobody feels confident, Aaron, in talking about it. Everybody's afraid. When you have an atmosphere of fear where people can't speak their mind or express themselves for fear of being canceled or for fear of losing a position, we never can get to the truth of how we resolve this, because people are hiding. People are hiding for fear and not, they're being stifled. So when you stifle speech, that creates a problem, and it actually signals that there's something desperately wrong.
I mean, we should address it because it's inevitable criticism here on this topic is that some people argue that raising these issues is transphobic. That sort of raising these flags puts transgendered people at risk. So I guess, to play devil's advocate, what do you say to that? What do you say to the fact that questioning these things is in itself dangerous?
Well, transphobic would be if we'd say, for example, that trans identifying people have absolutely no right to be in sport. That's not what we're saying at all. We want everybody to participate. I would say conversely, I mean, you just don't get away from this issue by calling people names, because if you call us transphobic for our point of view, then the idea that men and males can have a priority to self-identify and beat women and girls with all of their sex-based advantages, we could call that misogyny. Like, if we're going to just throw around words and terms, each side of this debate has, a perfectly legitimate reason perhaps to throw around a name, but throwing names around just doesn't get us anywhere. And it certainly doesn't help women and girls.
Certainly. I wanted to ask about your thoughts about the direction that this discussion is going. We know in other countries there have been high-profile incidents in sport. They seem to be drawing more attention as the years go by, and in some places we're seeing a sort of change in the tone of the discussion. What do you make of those changes, and do you see those changes coming to Canada as well, where we can have this discussion?
I think it's really positive change, Aaron, because thanks to MLI Institute and organizations like yours who have had the courage, very few, but growing numbers, have the courage to talk about this, to expose what the issue is, to expose the truth about the policies and the implications to women and girls. And so as we move forward, obviously the incidence of trans identifying males into those who identify into women's sports and win the prizes and awards and take places of women and girls and exclude women and girls, as the number increases with this ideology, obviously there's going to be more and more reports of women and girls who are unhappy with what's been happening, and the unfairness is being exposed. And so that's why we need to just finally, I'm so happy that many organizations in this country and beyond, not in this country, but in other countries, are actually, opening the debate, opening the conversation, making it, we'd say normalizing the conversation, because it's really a normal conversation. Who gets to be in which category? We always have these conversations in sport. So it's not considered to be hateful in sport to question eligibility.
Right. That makes sense. I guess finally, I wanted to talk about your fundraising effort for MLI. I mean, you feel so strongly about this issue that you've graciously decided to support a fundraiser to ensure
Absolutely.
that more work is focused on this issue. Could you tell us a bit about that and why you chose to support MLI as the beneficiary of your efforts?
Well, I've alluded to it a number of times, and I'll say it again. The MLI is one of the only institutions and think tanks in Canada that's willing to have the conversation, the very tough conversation about balancing of rights between vulnerable populations, trans-identified people on the one hand, and women and girls on the other hand. And so I've appreciated all of the different, I would encourage the public to go to your website and look at all the different articles, whether it's men and women's prisons, men and women's sports. You've actually handled it. And, I wrote the book on sporting.com and published it in 2021. And I started, it's such a good seller, such a bestseller that I've actually started to make a little bit of money with my book. And to me, this was never about earning money. It was about, amplifying the message. And so when I got a bit of a paycheck for that, I thought, well, you know what? I am going to lead a fundraiser and I want MLI to get donations and more funding. So I'll front some money and match donations so that the MLI can actually continue to publish more of this material, because I really believe it's critical that the Canadian public gets to understand what's going on at the policy level. When it comes to the grassroots, grassroots finally understands what's going on maybe a few years after a policy is put in place. When the MLI, Macdonald-Laurier Institute, talks about what the implications are of a policy position, at least we have advance warning, and leadership in sport, like myself, those in sport leadership, can have a real conversation about what we do about it before it starts to impact the children. And I really think that's why I'm feeling very, very committed to making sure that the organizations that have the courage to do this and have this conversation are rewarded, at least with enough funding to keep it going.
Well, thank you very much. We, of course, very much appreciate your support, and we certainly couldn't do it without having experts like yourself on our platform. I want to thank you also for this great conversation. And to those viewing or listening, if you agree with Linda and you're supportive of MLI's work to see more nuanced policies and more discussion about these policies dealing with gender identity issues in Canada, please consider donating to this fundraiser. For every $5 that you give, Linda and another private donor will each donate an additional $1, so that'll increase the value of your donation by 40%. We are a charity, so we rely on the support of Canadians to further our work. And with that, yes, I'll thank you one last time, Linda. Very much appreciate your time. And to those viewing and listening, we will catch you next time.
Thank you, Aaron. Please, everybody, donate. Thank you very much, and have a great day.